consuls were two officials with limited power and one-year terms. One controlled the army, the other directed the government. Again, we'll see this on a chart later on. The closest relation that we can see with what a consul was is like our president. Even though our president is only one person, he has control over a lot of government functions as well as the military. Occasionally, the republic would create what's known as a dictator, where in times of crisis, the republic would appoint a leader with absolute power to make laws and control the army. Power lasted for 6 months. As you can see from the fact that these guys have limited amount of time that they can do their job, it was important that they got the job done in the time they had. The councils, as it says, were only elected for 1 year. After that 1 year, they could not be re-elected again until 10 years had passed. So even though they had a lot of power, they did not have a lot of time to use that power. So it was important for them to use it to the best of their ability for as long as they could during that year. The purpose of the dictator was in order to cut out the middleman, to get rid of some of the conversation going on between the councils and the Senate and the tribune, and just get it done when it needs to. A lot of times during wartime, you don't have time to argue, you don't have time to discuss, a decision has to be made. So they realized that and put in this dictator position in order to accomplish that. To prevent this guy from getting too much power, though, they've restricted it by time. He can only be given power for 6 months. Finally, legions, just another term that we throw in there. Military units made up of 5,000 soldiers. So you might have heard of this term before. There's a movie on it. But basically a legion is just a unit made up of about 5,000 soldiers. So whenever you hear or read in our book, it talks about so-and-so sent 10 legions of people, you're talking about 5,000 soldiers times 10, which is obviously 50,000 soldiers in this case. So just to kind of give you an idea on the math. All right, here we're talking about the Roman government itself and how it was made up in a hierarchical way. If you notice, on the top, they've split it up between the plebeians and the patricians. The consuls, there's one of each. Because they only have 1 year to get the jobs done, they have to work closely together. If one of them makes a decision and the other one objects, then whatever it was doesn't happen. They both have to agree on whatever the issue is. Even though one's in control of the government, the other one's in control of the military, they do have to agree overall on what plan the other has. Underneath them, you have the senators, which were 300. There were 150 plebeian senators and 150 patrician senators. Makes it nice and easy. And then there were also 10 tribunes as well. And these were strictly plebeians. You'll notice that it's starting to lean a lot of power towards the plebeians. But if you also look, the majority of the population were plebeians. So it was decided that because of this, the plebeians would have a higher say or a bigger say in how government would function. But that doesn't exclude the patricians, since they did have a population presence as well. And finally, underneath, you got the citizen assemblies. The best way to kind of talk about a citizen assembly is think of it like a neighborhood block watch. You've got a group of people that get together, talk about the problems and their issues, and then they take that and send it up to the ones that can't make the decisions. The tribunes and the senators, their jobs primarily were to make the laws for the people to follow. If they don't know what the problems are, they can't make the laws. So these citizen assemblies, made up of adult males, would get together at the forum, discuss these problems, argue these problems out, and come up with some sort of consensus that they can take to the tribunes and the senators for a recommendation on new laws. But again, it was ultimately up to these senators and tribunes what they wanted to do in regards to that. So, Roman power expands. Steadily, the Romans conquered the Italian peninsula and took over the entire peninsula. As Rome conquered lands, people were absorbed into their ever-growing territory. Some people were accepted as citizens, others simply became allies. Now we're going to pause here because the important thing to realize is that citizens had the power to vote if you were a male, as compared to allies. The really only difference between the two is that citizens could vote and allies couldn't. Typically, allies were those cities or those small groups of people that were furthest away from Rome. They didn't have a really strong idea what was going on with Rome. They were loosely connected with Rome. They had been conquered by the Romans, but they were not allowed to vote because of their loose connection. The other thing about allies is, yes, they had to accept Roman rule, they had to accept Roman laws, but other than that, they were pretty much left to do whatever they wanted to do, as long as they didn't make any treaties with foreign countries or go against the Roman laws. Moving on. Rome eventually went to war against Carthage, which was a powerful city in North Africa. The struggle between them became known as the Punic Wars, and that is spelled Punic, the Punic Wars. And it lasted from 264 BC until 146 BC, so about 120 years, give or take. Here's kind of a picture of the Punic Wars and some of the battles that occurred. We won't talk much into this. If you want to pause and take a look, feel free. But this talks about the different strategies that they used, the different routes they took in order to try and conquer each other. Carthage was led by a brilliant general named Hannibal. Hannibal assembled an army of 50,000 infantry, which were just guys on foot, 9,000 cavalry, or soldiers on horseback, and 60 elephants. And they were intent on capturing Rome. They wanted Rome. He led his troops up through Spain and crossed the Alps into Italy. Now let's go back and put this into perspective. Here we have Carthage on the south here. And Hannibal, one of his techniques was not to go straight up the Mediterranean and into Rome, right here. Nope, he decided not to do that. Instead, he was going to do kind of a sneak attack. He was going to take his boats and go around and start in Spain. Here we start in Spain. He takes his troops with his elephants all the way up through Spain, takes a right turn at France, into the Alps, which is the separation between Italy and the rest of Europe, basically, through the Alps, and then eventually back down, hoping to take Rome from the north. Eventually it failed, which we'll talk about in a minute. Here's an artist's depiction of them moving their troops through the Alps with their elephants. This is a very famous one, actually, trying to direct his troops through the Alps. Carthage was very successful at this strategy when they hooked around from the north. They initially had defeated the Romans, but the Romans were able to retreat, regroup, and prevent Hannibal from sacking Rome. In the end, Rome defeated Hannibal in 202 BC near Zuma. Rome eventually defeated Carthage in the Third Punic Wars, thereby extending its power across the Mediterranean Sea. Once Rome was able to defeat Carthage, Rome had complete control of all the land surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. In that, he was able to completely control all of trade, all of shipping, thereby basically having the largest empire at the time. Nobody could beat him because his span of influence around the Mediterranean was so large. This is kind of a difficult map to see, but Rome's territory and power would only get bigger and stronger. So here we kind of see the power and the size of Rome and its empire. It's hard to see, but if you think of all this white as water, all of that is the Mediterranean Sea. And there's the Black Sea right there. And everything in green was the Roman Empire. They controlled present-day Spain, which is right here, France, the Netherlands, right here. Eventually, they would control parts of Britannia, all the way into Gaul and entire Italy. They've got Greece. They took over Turkey. Over here, they had what would be present-day Israel and Lebanon. Down here, we've got Carthage, and all along the shoreline of the Mediterranean. The only part they didn't have at the time of this map was the section by Egypt, but eventually they would take that as well. So, that is the end of this particular lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Mr. Vincent, and I will be more than happy to answer your questions. I hope you enjoy it, and have a great day.